you. I had it in my head to record, and I thought I recorded, but that's why I have you, Charles, because Dominic, because I can't ever remember to record. So thank you. So today, this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about qualitative research in general, and then I'm going to introduce you to actual qualitative study and what happened with this qualitative study, the process of what occurred, because from what I'm hearing from you, you guys understand the importance of qualitative research, but I also want you to appreciate the work that goes behind qualitative research as well. So I want to provide that information to you and just kind of help you see what that looks like, okay? Any questions before we get started? All right, let me share my screen. Okay. So let's begin with what qualitative research really is. There is really a lot of information that goes into the absolute understanding of qualitative research, and we can't cover it all in one lecture. So this really hits the tip of what qualitative research really entails. So we can have some class discussions regarding what that qualitative research might look like in your projects and how you might be able to utilize it for QI and evidence-based practice projects. But just so that you have an understanding, qualitative research aims to really understand individuals, groups, or populations in their natural settings. And it also aims to understand how particular phenomenon affects identified populations and to identify the meaning of experiences. And I heard you guys say meaning and what those experiences are. So great job pointing those out. Let's talk about some of the key terms that you're going to run into when we talk about qualitative research. So positionality refers to the researcher's relationship to the population and the phenomenon itself. Are you an insider, and how well are you actually accepted? Are you an outsider really trying to understand and get a better look into the world and the experiences? Now, you'll hear the terms epistemology and ontology, potentially epistemological or ontological views as well. And these two views are really based on the understanding of the researcher's stance to the research, as well as how they choose to potentially achieve an understanding of the experiences of their participants. Epistemology is really concerned with knowing why things are the way they are, while ontology is really concerned with being and what it is to be through the eyes of the participants. Finally, methodology is that approach to the qualitative research that one chooses. So let's talk about some of these approaches that you might see. So many of the approaches to qualitative research really exists, and the manner in which qualitative research is conducted is also really varying. Those who conducted qualitative research or mixed methods research are really able to situate the overall approach that they're taking. So let's talk about some of these approaches in a very broad overview. And we're going to begin with grounded theory. Have you guys heard of grounded theory before? Is that a familiar term, grounded theory?
Yes, but I don't know it well.
Okay, so let's talk about what grounded theory is. It is a qualitative approach, and it's just like what it sounds. It's developing a theory from the ground up. So that's why it's called grounded theory. So researchers attempt to develop this theory through collecting data and making observations in the field. And data can be collected through individual interviews or focus groups or observations. And ultimately, the researcher wants to identify the interrelated concepts regarding a particular phenomenon that they're trying to study in order to conceptualize this research into a theory or a model. That's why we call it grounded theory. Ethnography has historical ties to anthropology, and this research takes this deep dive into the participants' lives and attempts to find cultural meaning behind a particular phenomenon. And it's often focused on cultural perspectives. And you'll find that this research is really focused on a particular ethnic group, not the general population as a whole. Now, phenomenology or phenomenological research is my wheelhouse. And it really seeks to understand a particular phenomenon, and it can really integrate either epistemological views of knowing or ontological views of being based on the philosophical underpinnings that a researcher approaches with. So some of the philosophers believed that feelings had to be bracketed, such as Husserl. Now, Husserl felt that a researcher could bracket their feelings and experiences, and by doing that would avoid bias. And just so you know, Husserl is a philosopher and he's known as the father of phenomenology. His protege, Heidegger, actually said that it's not possible to bracket and put aside your feelings, and that no matter how hard you try, you will feel something during your research process. And his thought to avoid bias was to conduct these value-laden interpretations that involved understanding who you are as a researcher so you can understand how the participants live in the world and what it is to be them. So bias is often avoided through hermeneutic circles in interpretive phenomenology that is value-laden in nature. But this doesn't always occur. When some individuals in some disciplines have conducted phenomenological research using programs like Atlas TI and NVivo. But these are really, really difficult for researchers to create an understanding of how bias was avoided because they're relying on a computer to tell what a phenomenon is about. So case study research really involves a specific interest and specific person or persons. When doing a case study, there are usually just a couple of participants because the research takes a really deep dive into their lives. And it moves the understanding of a particular phenomenon forward and also builds on existing theory. So how does qualitative research begin? It begins very much so like what we've done in this class so far. So it's more like this cyclical process, a continuous process of inquiry. To begin the process, you have to first identify a particular question or a problem. And this then moves into looking at specific theories or taking a deep dive into the literature to see what is already known about the topic. From there, you can actually develop your question, which may change over time, and then identify the methodology and the methodological approaches that you're going to take when conducting your research. Now, this involves everything from the type of qualitative research to the sample, to the recruitment, the data collection, analysis, and so on. And once all this is identified and constructed, then you can begin collecting data and analyzing the data. And it's important that you can discuss how your findings are valid through rigorous processes. Finally, the dissemination of results occur and the process begins all over again. So how is data collected? Data for qualitative research can be collected in many different ways. Interviews, either face-to-face, phone, Skype, Zoom, focus groups, a group of people from the same population, surveys, journals or journal writing, observations, whether they're direct or recorded. Some examples of recorded are smart home research, are just an example. So these are the typical ways, but there are several creative ways that qualitative research has been conducted previously. So data can be analyzed through software or through humanistic interpretations. And here are just a few of the software programs that are currently marketed. When you do data software, you usually are doing a descriptive type of study. So you are able to take the data that you get, put it into the software, identify codes, and then pull out themes that way. But things like interpretive phenomenology, where value-laden process occurs, a computer doesn't have value-laden feelings. And so it's very difficult to do that through a computer system. And so you do it through humanistic interpretations, through what we call hermeneutic circles or qualitative circles. So there are several different researchers that have come up with criteria for rigor for qualitative research. Now, very well-known ones, which have been historically used for general qualitative research, would include Lincoln and Guba, as well as Standalowski's criteria. Other researchers have developed criteria for rigor specific to research processes, such as DeWitt and Plug, whose expressions for rigor are really related to interpretive phenomenology. Now, there's a lot of different criteria that exist, but these are some of the more well-known ones. So I do want to provide you with a little bit of information regarding reliability and validity. So reliability is statistical. Therefore, it does not apply to qualitative research. You can't say that a qualitative study is reliable because there's no statistical analysis and numbers that come up with that. Qualitative research is found to be valid through appraisals of quality and the rigor of the design itself. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions regarding this so far? All right, let's move on. What I want to do is I want to take you through my particular research as an interpretive phenomenologist and help you see what this process looks like a little bit. I'm going to talk about the process and I'll go through some of the other main kind of overarching concepts and stuff, maybe a little bit quicker, but I really want you to understand how rigorous qualitative research actually is and what it provides the researchers and practitioners with in order to move practice forward, okay? And in order to move the knowledge base forward. So my particular topic of interest is, or population itself is military dependence, specifically military adolescents. I have a love for adolescents in general, simply because this is such a crucial time in someone's life, right? We know that childhood experiences are known to really influence identity development in adolescents. But when we talk about military adolescents and the unique challenges that they face throughout their life, including frequent relocations that often leaves them trying to understand who they are and where they belong in the world, that can also have a great impact on their identity development. And on average, military adolescents move about every 2 to 4 years. And this cyclical process of leaving behind and trying to integrate into new changing environments places them at this high risk for mental health issues and maladaptive behaviors. So parting from pure established relationships and integrating in new school systems and then striving to be accepted into new social groups leads to these varied levels of exploration of who they truly are. So some significant information to truly understand about this population includes brain development as well as the constructs of identity and adaptation. Before I conducted my study, I really needed to define what these concepts were. I needed to include in there what brain development do they go through and what is identity and what is adaptation, because what the phenomenon that I was really looking at is high mobility and identity development in this subpopulation. So we know that adolescents are often faced with social and emotional issues that could affect their overall well-being and their impulsivity. And we know that adolescents are impulsive and reactiveness can be really traced to this asynchronous brain development that they have during adolescence, where there's this reward system of the brain that really seeks this instant gratification. And it forms sooner than that prefrontal cortex, which really helps with self-control. So during adolescence are really prone to making decisions prematurely. So Marcia's identity status theory provides this great explanation about the construct of identity. So exploration, or what's known as identity crisis, is this active search for who one truly is. And it's a commitment. It recognizes oneself with assurance, or committing to like a particular job or religion. So lower levels of exploration, no matter what that level of commitment is, doesn't lead to a healthy process of identity development, because either an individual will not commit to an identity, which is also known as identity fusion, or they'll prematurely commit to one, also known as foreclosure. So higher levels of exploration are ideal because in adolescence, even if the commitment has not yet occurred, which is known as moratorium, it leads towards a healthy process of identity achievement, which is the ultimate goal. So I want to stick to this for a minute because I want to talk about I know that I'm talking about my research, but I feel like this theory is so applicable to where you guys are as students right now. This theory doesn't only talk about the adolescent times, but it also speaks to the experiences that we go through in adulthood. You guys may have felt that you have committed to an identity as nurses at one point, but then decided to go back to school and become nurse practitioners and go for your doctoral degrees. And so now this is a new search for who you are. It's a new search of identity. And that experience right there can be placing you in different realms of this, of what you see here. And sometimes that can cause a lot of anxiety because then you're trying to really figure out where you fit in. Who am I? Where am I at? And I just want you to keep in mind as you continue to go throughout your program. All right, back to this research. So adaptation. Sister Callista Roy's adaptation model really conceptualized how the effective use of coping mechanisms and processes, both mental and physical, lead to really adaptive behaviors, which is seen in individuals having greater control over 4 different adaptive modes, and one of them being self-concept or group identity. You know, nurses are at the forefront, and this is why this is a nursing theory. Nurses are at the forefront of supporting adaptive behaviors, and the conceptualization of adaptation is what provides them with the knowledge necessary in order to create environments where adaptation can be fostered. So this next area, you know, the first area really informed the background and significance of what I was looking at. And in order to really move forward with my research study, I needed to complete a literature review, a really good, solid literature review. When conducting this literature review, I only ended up with 2 qualitative and 5 quantitative articles to synthesize. And there were several gaps that were known within the literature. I'm going to skip over these sections real quick, and I'll go directly to the gaps real quick. All right. So this literature review really, really grabbed my committee, and they truly understood the necessity of this research after reading my literature review. First, there's not enough work that focuses on high mobility and the developmental milestones in military youth, particularly identity development during the adolescent years. Most of the studies that were employed were quantitative cross-sectional designs, and the one phenomenological study that was found was conducted in 2006, and it was published in 2010. So more research really needed to be done that looks at the lived experiences of military adolescents from their own perspectives in order to determine the best interventions and to create future research initiatives that would expand on that knowledge of how to care for this population. Further, there was limited work that looked at this phenomenon in this population from a nursing standpoint. And as holistic providers in various settings, we nurses, we can provide really unique perspectives of care and education that would foster healthy developmental processes. So to address those gaps in the problem, I conducted a research study with the purpose of exploring the lived experiences of highly mobile military adolescents through a nursing perspective in order to guide their health and wellness. Now, the central aim of the study was to understand the lived experiences of highly mobile military adolescents in search of their identity, with this long-term goal to determine the most efficient methods to support a healthy identity development process. And the research question was, what does the lived experiences of high mobility mean to adolescents in military families who are developing their identity? All right, so this talks about the approach that I took. So I took this interpretive phenomenological approach that really looks at the lived experiences of individuals who have experienced the same phenomenon, that seeks to understand the ontological perspectives of being in the world through the eyes of the participants. So Heidegger, we spoke about Heidegger earlier in the presentation, posited that Dasein, which is a German term, or being in the world, is the foundation of interpretive phenomenology. And it informs the positioning of the researchers throughout the exploration of a lived experience. So why is this even important? That's because other qualitative research that we discussed, and even other philosophical underpinnings within phenomenology, posits that researchers can bracket and separate their feelings. But in my particular case, and with this particular research, my own experiences as a military spouse and mother to highly mobile military children and adolescents made it impossible for me to truly be able to separate my feelings from this research. So as an interpretive phenomenologist, I position myself close to the participants in the research, allowing my interpretations to be value-laden in nature. And over the next few slides, I'm going to talk to you about how I ensured to be able to avoid interpretive bias because I was so close to this research. How could I avoid interpretive bias? Before we get there, this was my inclusion-exclusion, exclusion criteria, which I won't get into too much. And this kind of talks about a little bit about, the military population itself. And what I used in order to recruit participants was a convenience and a snowball sampling approach within personal networking groups, social media, and referrals. And for data collection, I asked the participants to fill out demographic surveys and conducted semi-structured interviews. And the participants drove the interview. So amazing to see how insightful these adolescents were. So to meet the value-laden approach to interpretive phenomenology, there's a humanistic interpretation of the transcribed data that had to take place with individual interpretations. And it was followed by interpretive hermeneutic circles. So the discussion in these circles were really influenced by each team member's own experiences, also known as their force structures, and their own existence that's influenced by time, meaning, and knowledge. It's also known as historicality. So to describe what this process really looks like, I'm going to share with you what the research team did. And this is a big piece of the qualitative research. So I would inform the team when this de-identified transcribed interview was ready for access in this secure share drive that I had. And then I would provide them with a timeline for when individual interpretations should be completed. And in that time, they would read the transcript, they would take notes, and they write up their own interpretation of the participants' data using their own knowledge, their own understanding, and their own experiences in order to express why they arrived at those interpretations. A hermeneutic circle would then take place every 1 to 2 weeks, where I'd provide field notes of our previous meetings and the different themes that surfaced, ensuring that every single member had this opportunity to provide feedback. And then we would then read our interpretations of the new interviews, and we took part in this back and forth discussion of the meaning of each participant's experiences. These discussions were so rich in context and deeply rooted that not only did themes surface during my hermeneutic circles, but it also brought the research team to truly understand the importance of this work. And as the themes did surface, they were then organized into this Excel spreadsheet that I have, and that's how my brain works. So it was color-coded, organized everywhere. Like you could look at it and you could automatically identify what the themes were. So by taking part in this process right here, we were able to ensure that the findings and themes derived from the study were valid and on point with the participants' experiences. And it was also a method for us to avoid interpretive bias. So just some ethical considerations. And when you guys complete the ethical considerations in your paper, these are some things that you want to discuss. That you did get IRB approval, or that you are seeking IRB approval, that you had consents or assents or parental permissions. Just so you know, consents are obtained from adults 18 years and older. Assents are obtained from anyone who is less than 18. And then parental permission must go along with assents because they're minors, okay? Potential risks should also go into ethical considerations, which includes, a lot of different things based on the study that you're doing. Here, it was breach of confidentiality and risk for psychological or emotional distress. All right, so we talked about criteria for rigor just a few moments ago. And I told you that DeWitt and Plug's expressions of rigor was what's really, really the criteria for rigor that you would really want to use for interpretive phenomenology. And I want to show you why. So for this particular rigor right here, you would need balanced integration, openness, concreteness, resonance, and actualization. So balanced integration is finding balance between the philosophical underpinnings and the participants themselves. When we conducted this study, the way that this was done throughout the interpretive process was by discussing the meaning of the participants' experiences based on the information that they shared during the interviews, while allowing this room for a value-laden interpretation to occur and to be understood by our own knowledge and experiences. Openness highlights the methodological process. And I shared with you the whole approach that our team did and conducted, from individual interpretations all the way to the hermeneutic circles. And it was really important that the data was really organized in this really clear manner in order to ensure that the truth and the meaning of the participants' experiences could be captured. Concreteness connects the readers by identifying themes and discussing those links to nursing and nursing practice. And this was done by trying to find or tying those findings through both theoretical and philosophical perspectives regarding this phenomenon, as well as sharing the implications for practice and future research. Resonance provides rich descriptions of experiences through quotes from actual participants. And as I discussed the results, or when I do discuss the results, I'm going to provide some rich, meaningful text that allows you to really, truly feel and understand what the participants were experiencing. And finally, actualization is a continuation of interpretation and findings of trustworthiness in the results after the work has been disseminated. So trustworthiness, let's talk about that. Qualitative research is found to be trustworthy when you have more and more individuals read and review your research and correlate their own experiences with your research, that they could see how this research is valid. Does that make sense? All right. So that's just some demographic information. Now I want to ask you guys at this point, I am more than happy to take you through what our study found, the themes and sub-themes, and to kind of give you an idea of how that all looked at the end of our study. Now that I've talked to you a little bit about our study or about my study and what I did. Are you guys interested in looking through these themes, or do you want me to skip over this?
Interested.
You want me to go through this?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So we had 11 participants. Seems like a small number, right? But I cannot tell you how strong and significant the data was. After interviewing that 11th participant, the full team, which was myself and 4 PhD prepared nurses and a PhD student or a PhD candidate at the time. By the 11th participant, we all said there was no need to conduct any more interviews because of how strong the data was that came across. And in looking at the chart, you'll see that the 4 major themes that I identified were self-perception in the world, building relationships, overwhelming emotions, and fostering healthy transactions or transitions. So let's begin with self-perception in the world. So the context of this theme was rooted in the understanding that both internal and external environments shapes how individuals live in the world. Worldly view was a sub-theme here, as some of the participants felt that the different cultures that they experienced from high mobility shaped their understanding of diversity, which was awesome. Press, one of the participants stated, "I've never grown more as a person than learning about other cultures and just people who came from different walks of life. And it's been really impactful on my character and self-growth." Christopher offered insight into overcoming different challenges with every single move that he had. A second sub-theme of self-perception in the world was a place to call home. So a lot of the participants in this study really struggled to identify with where home was, which affected their feelings of belongingness to a place as they tried to understand where they came from. So Victoria stated, "It's hard to have an identity when you don't have somewhere to identify with." And Press mentioned that college will be the longest place that she has ever lived before, and it was really making her nervous about applying to go to college. The next sub-theme was milestones and the milestones that they missed through so many different moves. A lot of them talked about these deep inner thoughts and emotional testaments of what they felt they were missing compared to non-military adolescents who were not highly mobile, including their friendships and social connectedness. So during her interview, Claire became really emotional, mentioning that because of moving, she won't have many things that non-military kids have, like a childhood best friend or a childhood house that she grew up in, or even a high school reunion, because she was on her 5th high school. Press further stated that I feel like we would all, referring to military kids, we like to have something in common with the rest of the youth, I feel like, for me especially, as she described not being able to relate to her friends because moving delayed her ability to get her license. The final sub-theme under self-perception in the world was identity exploration. So life as a highly mobile military adolescent led to these varied levels of exploring their own identities, as well as the commitment to the lives that they expressed that they wanted to have and live in adulthood. Vendetta offered this deep understanding to this, stating, because I've spent so much time trying to integrate with everybody else, I kind of just never knew who I was in ways. So because I spent so much time trying to integrate, there were a lot of things that I was silent about myself. Casey described how every time I moved, I had to change my identity around who I was hanging out with. So she described all her identities as being a big blob. Now, as you have seen, there has been some very deeply rooted feelings regarding these sub-themes under self-perception in the world. Now let's move on to building relationships. So we know that adolescence is a crucial time for individuals to be able to connect with family and community around them, including their peers and their coaches and educators, and they often assess their surroundings, especially when integrating into a new school or social community. So the social process surfaced as a sub-theme to building relationships as participants went into how they not only form friendships, but how others just don't understand how they need to lead them as well. For example, Alyssa stated, like they, referring to non-military kids, will never understand what it feels like to be a military child. I've lost so many friendships and relationships that, meant a lot to me. And it sucks because you can't really hold on to it, Then Vedetta opened up mentioning that moving so much has made her an introvert and she stresses about her future independence. In addition to the social process, passing was identified as a sub-theme of building relationships. So passing is this anthropological, sociological based term that really refers to the integration of a person or persons into new groups of people without drawing attention to themselves. However, this process can cause emotional consequences that really leads to one's confusion about who they really are and their own identities. So Jack's analogy was so intuitive that it just really hit all of us on our team. He said, I feel like a social chameleon. The mentality I've taken on is if I'm with unfamiliar people, then I sort of have to change my colors, change the way I hold myself up, talk and act to kind of attract their attention with all these bright colors and then slowly dim it down to a point where they like me for who I am by easing them into the facts. Like slowly getting into a pool of water because it's really cold and slowly warm up to it. Yes, this was a 16-year-old, just an FYI. Christopher used music as a more direct example of an instance where an adolescent might change who they are, mentioning that people change when they move in order to be more like the peers around them. Moving forward, the final sub-theme under building relationships was parental and familial relations. So these relationships, whether positive and supportive or struggling and non-supportive, truly affected these participants' moving experiences based on their stories. For example, Rachel mentioned it, referring to integration, normally begins with my parents. Like they try to have us meet up with people over the summer, like who we've been close with, like the friend I moved from the same place as. Vendetta shared that I didn't really build a strong connection or be able to tell him, Dad, about my day, be able to tell him about things that happened at school. Like I grew up keeping my feelings to myself, which was stressful because like there were a lot of times where I was sad. There were a lot of times when I was angry, specifically then and now. So those three sub-themes painted this picture of the relationships that these adolescents built when leaving and integrating into new environments, as well as the type of relationships that they had with their parents. And this led to our next theme, which interconnects their experiences with their emotions. So the majority of the participants began their interviews discussing several positive aspects of high mobility. However, as the interviews continued to progress and more trust was gained of me, the interviewer, the participants seemed more comfortable to really naturally express the overwhelming emotions that they were feeling. So the first sub-theme to surface was feelings of burden, and that identification of moral reasoning was heavily noted amongst that data, as many of the participants expressed that they have held so much in through the years of moving for the simple fact that they didn't want to stress their parents any more than they already were. So for example, Alyssa mentioned, so it's like, I don't want to like, put myself first and say like, because I'm not really that type of person. So I don't really talk to her about most things. You can't really say how you feel because I don't really want her to feel like she's the reason why I'm suffering, And at that point, she begins to cry. Jack felt that he had told everything in order not to burden his parents. So the feelings of grief and pain also emerged from the narrative data as another subtheme to overwhelming emotions. As these feelings were further explored, many of the participants implied that they needed to stay strong because that was what was expected of them, whereas others expressed notable maladaptive behaviors that really led to feelings of depression and anxiousness at times. For example, Press's experiences were really, really emotionally rooted as she described the anger and the pain that she felt when moving from friends. She described memories as you have them, you hold them, and then you have to like kind of say goodbye to the person that they're attached to. And then she goes on to say that it's like grieving a lost one in a way, because although losing someone is more permanent, you still go through the same recovery process. Vendetta's openness to what it was like for her was eye-opening. As she mentioned, every single move, the most devastating part was not that we were moving again. It was just losing people. And I think that's one negative impact that being part of a military family has had on me, is that I've become numb to moving and to losing my friends. And the final sub-theme under overwhelming emotions was lack of control. So many of the participants expressed this lack of control over so much in their lives due to the high mobility that they had to face as a child in a military family. Some expressed this lack of control had led them to learning to just deal with the fact that moving was inevitable, while others expressed the lack of control has led to the inability to really form meaningful relationships. So JT's experiences added to the sub-theme as he mentioned that even though he knew that he couldn't control the moves, he would still get angry at himself for leaving. And Nitro offered another perspective saying it's difficult to move from friends, especially the ones you've gotten to know well, because it feels like you can't really plant your roots as far as like friendships and relationships with those people. And then finally, fostering healthy transition was the fourth and final sub-theme. And this theme pertained to the ways in which healthcare providers, such as nurses and doctors, could better help military adolescents who moved often. So I questioned these participants as my last question about their thoughts on what the nurses and doctors, or what nurses or doctors could do. And many gave really insightful answers about being more intentional or being more involved in the community, including kids more. Jack stated, I feel like during a physical, they say, do you feel safe at school or home? I feel more like instead of saying, do you feel safe there? It's an important question, but maybe follow up with, are you feeling okay in school? Like, are you good with friends? Are your grades good? Like, what is your mental fortitude? That should be an important question because physical health and mental health are like key important things in every person's life. We can't have one without the other. Vendetta offered great suggestions. I feel as if nurses and doctors will at first try to communicate to people who don't really understand what military kids are going through and just try to build those connections. Try, like, not force people to be open-minded, but kind of look at things from a new perspective. And then finally, Press stated, noticing them a little bit more. Because like sometimes, I mean, us military kids were noticed, but I feel like not a lot of people do notice us in a way that they notice the active duty member of the households. And then maybe not realize, oh, the kids are basically active duty too, because they're moving all around. So some other pretty surprising perspectives that caught our attention was Victoria, who said, a doctor has never asked me how I'm feeling unless it's physical. And JT, who stated, nurses, I don't know, because we don't really try to talk to nurses like that. So you could understand my response to that. I tried very hard to keep a very straight face. Anyway, so those are the major themes and the sub-themes that came out of that particular study. So now what I want to do is just quickly tie in what that data means to the theory that we spoke about at the very beginning of this study, okay? So looking at the construct of identity and the theoretical ties between Marcia's identity statuses and the data itself, there really is really telling information here. When we look at Marcia's identity statuses, we don't necessarily see many of the participants in that low exploration, low commitment, or high exploration, high commitment statuses. Yet what we did see was low levels of exploration of an identity, yet high levels of commitment was really prominent across the participants. And this was because the adolescents often committed to an identity based on their environmental, familial, and social experiences that they had, rather than an independent exploration of self. So one really direct example is when Rachel mentioned that going into the military was what she chose because, in her words, it's the one thing I know. And the experience of passing and conforming to others around them was also this factor, as well as conforming to the expectations and suppressing many of the overwhelming emotions that they had. As we look at moratorium or high levels of exploration without committing just yet, we can identify that moving and experiencing diverse environments and communities may seem like an opportunity for adolescents to greatly explore who they are in context of the world around them, which a lot of them did offer. But when these changes in environment occur so often, time to explore is really greatly limited. Therefore, it can lead to great confusion of self, and rather than exploring to commit, as seen within what's called the MAMA cycle, which is moratorium achievement cycle, highly mobile military adolescents commit by conforming. And one really important takeaway is that although many seem to be in the states of foreclosure, this didn't mean that they would not be successful throughout adulthood. And that's something that was really important to put out there. On the contrary, they may be very productive members of society, but the paths that they've chosen to take in life may have been more influenced by conformation rather than the experiences that they've had to face as a highly mobile military adolescent. So let's look at that Roy adaptation model and what that looks like. So when looking at this particular study, we recognize that the move itself as being the stimuli, with some of the external factors being leaving friends and making friends and leaving and integrating into new schools and leaving homes. When coping with this, there are many internal factors that come into play for the participants, including personal views of exploring the world. Now, this perspective showed that there was this sense of adaptability to the constant moving experience, but many also shared this deeply rooted emotional ties to the overwhelming feelings, which led our particular team to believe that many participants were experiencing suppressed emotional feelings of pain and grief, as well as burden. And so this is the gateway to maladaptive behaviors, which many were experiencing on their own, which was mainly due to the desire not to burden their parents or They were just not aware of the resources around them. Now, all of these thoughts led to some sense of coping, yet unresolved feelings. And that could lead to maladaptive behaviors now and later in life, which is where the nurses and healthcare providers really come in to help foster coping mechanisms that would allow these adolescents to not only simply display um, adaptive behaviors, but also internalize adaptation as well. So I'm going to talk about that implications for practice with nurses in a moment, but I want to talk to you a little bit about the philosophical ties. So identity development and adaptation to changing environments could be well explained through theoretical reasoning. But to truly understand the meaning itself of the experiences that they had, or what it was to be, or as Heidegger referred to it, design, a look into existential authenticity was really necessary here. So Heidegger posited that existential authenticity is the true understanding and representation of self while being in the world, and when presented with both experiential and relational influences. And it's represented by how one stays true to oneself throughout one's life and one's own identity. And that one's own identity is always in question, showing how deeply we as humans care about who we are individualistically and to that world at large. So to be authentic is most represented by our own understanding of who we are at any given time. So through this view, the existential authenticity that each of these participants portrayed was really rooted, deeply rooted in the emotional accounts that they had. They understood the experiences they had trying to integrate into new environments. They understood the cultural diversity that they were being exposed to. They understood that they had pain and grief and lack of control. Therefore, they understood what it meant to be through the experiences that they faced as highly mobile military adolescents. And although their exploration or commitment of an identity itself were greatly influenced by their experiences and what they faced, the meaning of their experiences as a whole led to a deeper understanding into the relationships between their actions and their desires to remain authentic. And this was really intriguing to me because it's through this that I realized how an understanding of one's identity was interwoven into the philosophical underpinnings of interpretive phenomenology. So here were my implications for practice. I spoke a little bit about the need to do a socio-ecological a study that focused on socio-ecological framework and to understand it, the impact of high mobility across multiple influential levels, and the implications for practice, which included school and social health promotion programs. These are just some limitations and some references. So what I want to do is tell you what all this study led to. So this study was actually conducted pre-pandemic, and the results in the discussion occurred around summer of last year. And so we realized not only was this important, was this lacking in the literature, but now we're hit with this pandemic, and what is it going to do to this population? So I was able actually to network with a couple of different individuals and experts across the US. And currently I'm working with an individual out of Colorado who has her doctorate in education, and her dissertation was focused on the professional development of teachers of military adolescents. And I also am working with a military journalist whose focus was on military families. And today we're actually we put together a study, and we're looking at the impact of high mobility on adolescents who had to transition during the pandemic, and taking all the research that all of us have done, putting this study that I just talked to you about, the study that we're currently conducting now, and the research study as well from the educator, putting all that together, how can we inform a multidisciplinary approach to supporting this population in the public school system using healthcare, education, and mental health? And that's where we're at right now. We also have in our interpretive team a nurse practitioner and a couple of nurses. So this way they can also inform how we can best support them. Now there's different organizations out there that already support military adolescents from an educational perspective, but they're so siloed in what their focus is on that they don't include a holistic approach that nurses could bring into this, which is that healthcare and mental health as well. So we were invited, once our research kind of got out there, we were invited to speak at a national conference this summer for the Military Child Education Coalition. And this will help to hopefully begin forming those relationships where we can build those programs that I just showed you were implications for practice for this population. So that was a really long lecture. But I hope that just reviewing that study itself gave you some appreciation for the intricacy that goes into qualitative research and how qualitative research could truly inform experiences and practice moving forward. What are your thoughts?
I thought that was pretty impressive. I mean, I never thought like moving around like that would be really crazy to some of the people. But I've met like a lot of military, not adolescents, but the people I was in the military with, they love moving around the world, like German, like different places, But I never got to the point where I got like somebody was like, you know what, I'm so tired of moving until the research you just talked about, just kind of interesting, some people really hate it, how it affects them, especially adolescents.
Mm-hmm. And what I love of being able to share this with you is that you guys are you're going to be nurse practitioners and potentially serving in areas around here and in the Puget Sound where it's high military. And you'll have those who are in TRICARE or TRICARE Standard or TRICARE Prime, and some of them, they see their primary care providers that are actually in the civilian sector. And so that's really important to understand, how do I approach being able to serve this population and the military population as a whole?
What I really loved from that is that they also noticed, at least from going into seeing their doctor or talking to a nurse, they wanted that incorporation of mental health with that physical assessment. And they wanted to talk about it, but we're looking kind of for an avenue for that.
Some of them were. They really, really were. And whether they realized it even at that time or they only realized it when they divulged it to me, there was an outlet there that they were looking for. I would tell you, out of the participants, I think 8 of them, maybe it was just 7, had times where we had to stop their interview because they were crying because of what they were experiencing. And some of the experiences that they said, man, like that one guy with the social chameleon and mental fortitude. I mean, I was like, man, I feel like you could just talk to me all day and tell me what those experiences are and really help me relate and all that stuff. He was very good with his words.
Wow.
It's a random question, but do you think this will, probably have little to no effect, but was there a difference among the participants, or did you screen out for people that are on the typical, I'm going to deploy every 4 years and change and move? Not that that's typical, but it seems like average 4, but some people do 2, depending on what they're doing. They're every year they're moving, and then how did that affect the kids versus people that were able to kind of stay within a 4 to 5 year, or how do you navigate that with these kids?
So when we talk about deployment, and we'll talk about military terms here, deployment is actually when the active duty member does go to a place that's separate from their family. So deployment, and oftentimes you'll hear deployment overseas or abroad or to, some type of area that their family can't go. So you'll see that in Iraq, Afghanistan, different high-risk areas. A lot of work has been done on deployment, but as far as high mobility, not enough work has been done on high mobility. Let me show you this real quick. This was that demographic that I skipped over, and I will show you really quick. Can you see this PowerPoint slide? Okay. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 females, 4 males. The total number of experiences. Let me put this, hold on one second. Let me share something with you real quick. I'm going to stop sharing here. And we share this one because there you go. So 4 were male, 7 were female. The highest number of moves experienced by any of the participants was 11 moves. But by the time that I completed the study, that person who experienced 11 moves in their childhood already experienced 13. Now, to provide just like a little bit more reality behind those numbers during school-aged years, and that was only between kindergarten and present time, collectively, the 11 participants experienced a total of 85 moves together. 85 moves between 11 participants. Now, you'll find a lot of research out there, Charles, that talks about how often the military relocates you, and on average, and it's really based off of your rank and your position and what you do. It's on average every 2 to 4 years. I know for us, for example, the least amount of time we've ever been anywhere was 10 months, and the most was here, and we're going on our 3rd year. And this is the most we've ever been anywhere, longest we've ever been anywhere. And we're looking to get out. So this is going to be like home, which is so crazy to think about. But yeah, on our average was 18 to 24 months. We would move every 18 to 24 months to different parts of the country. I have peers. Like I said, one of the participants moved 5 times in her high school years. So as far as the number of moves, I didn't look at non-high mobility. I looked specifically at high mobility and the impact that has on identity development. So that was the demographic that I was trying to recruit.
So when you're doing that research, were you looking at were you asking like some of them, like what's the pros and the cons, or were you just focused on the negative they were experiencing?
No, great question, Dominic. I had 2 questions, and that was it in my whole entire interview. My questions were, I'm a nurse, and you know, as I told you, I want to understand what it's like to be highly mobile adolescent. I never even brought up the fact of identity was a part of my study. I said, can you tell me what that has been like for you in your life? They drove the interview. I didn't have any other questions that I had set to answer. They drove the interview, and based off of what they divulged, I would say, can you talk a little bit more about that? That really stands out. Can you tell me more about how you felt? I did not drive any of those interviews. The very last question I asked, so the very first question was at the beginning, and the very last question I asked at the very end was, how can nurses and doctors, and I used specifically doctors because they weren't familiar with what physicians truly were, like I would have to explain it. So I said nurses and doctors because it really helped for them, for adolescents. But I said, what can nurses and doctors do to help support you? That was the only 2 questions that I had set in my interviews. Now, if there was a time where there was a lull, I might bring up a question like, okay, what advice might you give to other adolescents who have to move so much and who are in the military? You know, I might have something in my pocket that I could put out, but never drove the interviews. It wasn't my story, or I wasn't trying to create any type of path for the way the interview was going to go. Every single adolescent drove their own interview.
About the sample size, I know for the quantitative we say like at least 30 participants, but yours was like 11. So on the qualitative, do we have a specific number of sample size we're supposed to focus on, or it just doesn't matter?
For quantitative, it's not 30. For quantitative, you have to do a G-power analysis and different statistical things in order to identify, based on the quantitative data that you're collecting and the psychometric tool that you're using, what's the minimum amount of participants that you need to truly get reliable results. Here, in every single qualitative research, except for interpretive phenomenology, the goal is called saturation. Saturation is when you do these qualitative analyses over and over, and there's no new themes. There's no new themes that are coming up, right? In interpretive phenomenology, it's knowing. We had from participant 6 on, not one new theme came up. Not one new theme. So by that point, we could interview 5 more, sure. But we already had 5 interviews in a row where not one new theme came up. And that's with them driving their own interview. So that's how we met that sense of knowing that this, and we took this rigorous process of interpretation and translation and understanding the themes.
Dr. Thomas, I have I guess a side question. Are there resources available for kids on the base for mental health?
Oh yeah, so there are resources available. So resources include on the post, there's a lot of different resources, and JBLM is so great about that.
That's good.
They have, and also there's Military One Source, which is available to military families and adolescents, and they actually provide free mental health counseling, up to 12 visits for military families, which is so amazing and so awesome.
Yeah.
The problem is that you have to live on post, because not all families want to drive on post, right? Like we live off post. I'm not going to drive on post to bring my kids to a youth center so they can connect. It's just too much and too much of a hassle. And so in these areas that are surrounding military installations, which the majority of military families live off post because there's not enough housing to house them on post. There's not enough support. And the integration of understanding that population.
Wow.
Yeah. So although this really spoke about what qualitative data and qualitative research look like, I want to talk a little bit about the application of qualitative analysis and evaluations for a DNP project. When you're doing a mixed method study, you can utilize different types of qualitative methodologies, right? And different types of analysis. Actually, one of my really, really great friends who graduated with her PhD, she actually did a mixed method study with interpretive phenomenology as her qualitative piece. And she did something on fetal loss, grief and pain. She measured grief and pain, and she did an interpretive phenomenological design in order to understand the experiences. But oftentimes, especially in your DNP project, what you might deploy are more things like surveys and less really interviews where the individuals drive their interview. You may want to understand specific experiences. What was your experience after applying this intervention? How did you feel? Was there things that needed to be improved? There's different things that you're going to collect that are very specific, have very specific questions. And in that case, you would probably do a descriptive study where you would get all that data and it would be all descriptive, and you would put it into some type of data analysis program like I showed you there, and you would analyze it to see what themes came across. Then when you report your results, you would report your quantitative results and you would back it up with your qualitative results. We're not expecting you to do a mixed method designs here, just so you know, okay? I just want to make sure that you guys got that off your head. But here for this particular project that you're doing in this course, I am having you develop a mixed methods design because I really want you to understand the impact of the use of quantitative and qualitative research together. Okay. What other questions do you guys have?
I just have the comment. I really like how you showed how to integrate the theory. Like take the research and then tie that back in at the end to the theory. That was really helpful.
Oh, good. I'm happy it was. When I watched a lot of defenses and read through a lot of stuff, the one piece that I felt like I was missing was that tie back into theory. Yes, thank you for sharing with me the way that theory was integrated, but I really need to understand more about this how you could truly display it. And so that was one of the things that I was really passionate about when I was defending and writing up my dissertation, that I could truly articulate and tie back into from the background and significance all the way to chapter 5. So chapter 1 all the way to chapter 5. So any other thoughts? Any other questions? Or are you guys ready for bed? Are you guys tired and beat?
Always.
Me too. So what you're going to find, guys, is as you continue to conduct research, evaluating outcomes, you're going to identify what your passions are. Trust me on this. You're going to identify what your passions are. I realized what my passions were after conducting this research. I realized the population-specific, population-specific areas that were important to me. And it's not only the military population and adolescents, it's adolescents as a whole, because it's such a crucial time in one's life. And so making that my passion, a lot of what I do, a lot of the research I do focuses on the adolescent population. A lot of the service that I do in the community focus on that population as well. For example, I'm a youth soccer coach for my girls team, and they range from like 12 and up. And then I also recently was elected or chosen to be part of the North Thurston Public School Board. And so I'm doing that now, and working to potentially run for elections for the next term as well, because I'm so passionate about this population through the research that I've done and everything that I've read about it, that I really want to be able to provide insight from a nurse's perspective and what that could look like. And a lot of times nursing is missing in so many areas, which is why you guys are really going into an amazing profession through this education. Because not only are you going to be able to practice as clinicians, but you guys are really going to be able to drive practice as DNPs, which is so exciting. And I know that you guys are tired as heck right now, and you guys are just like in information overload, but I'm telling you, everything that you're doing right now is going to make such a huge difference in our nursing practice. I hope you see that.
Can we talk about what we should be doing by next Tuesday?
Yeah, we can talk immediate stuff. Shit. Hold on, let me bring it up. All right, so next Tuesday. All right, let me pull up the form. You're going to be proposing your mixed methods design. We're actually going to do this in class as well. I'm going to have you guys peer review each other during class time. So I'm pulling it up. Hold on 1 second. Schedule discussions. All right, let me share this screen right here. So in your syllabus, you will find under the discussions, discussion board 4 is operationalizing variables and data analysis plan. So you're going to need to identify at least 3 potential quantitative analytic methods. And I want you to identify 3 because I want you to explore the different methods that you could use to quantitatively evaluate the outcomes of your project. And so I provided examples below, and I'll show you that in a minute. But some examples would include an independent t-test. Do you guys want to go over this real quick? I want to see where you guys are at. So independent t-test, tell me what that's about. Independent t-test. Anyone? All right, so with an independent t-test, how many times are we measuring?
Just once for the difference?
You can't measure once for a difference
Oh, hold on. I don't know.
because then you can't see the difference. If
Twice.
you measure once.
Right.
Twice.
Twice, yes. So t-tests, 2. Just think about t and then 2. Okay, so you're measuring at 2 different points for a t-test. Now for that independent t-test, let's talk about is an independent t-test between groups or within groups? When I say between groups, are you measuring 2 different data points or 2 different data points times with 2 different groups? Or are you measuring 2 different data points within one group? Let me give you the other name of a t-test, paired t-test. So you have an independent and you have a paired t-test. Which one is between groups and which one is within groups?
So I think the independent is 2 different groups, and then the paired is like within one group.
Good job. When you pair a t-test, when you do a paired t-test, you're comparing the means of the same group. It's paired within that same group. The independent t-test, you're comparing the means of 2 different groups, so they're independently done. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about, I'm not going to go into all the ANOVAs, I'll go into some of them, but if a t-test is for 2 different measurement points, what would an ANOVA be?
I thought you had to have 2 or more for an ANOVA.
3 or more.
3 or more?
For an ANOVA, it's 3 or more data points. Otherwise, it would be a t-test. It's only
Is that
2.
still trying to see if the means are equal, like for the ANOVA, kind of like the t-test?
Yes. Well, not that they're equal, it's see if there's differences within the means.
Yeah.
And you would do
Okay.
it over a few times. So let me give you some examples, okay? So let's talk about an independent t-test. We have a control group and we have an experimental group, okay? And what we did was in our control group, in all of our groups, in both of our groups, we just gave them an educational pamphlet to read, all right? But in our experimental group, we gave them videos to watch as well, all right? So everyone got educational pamphlets, but in our experimental group, we gave them educational pamphlets. We gave them educational videos as well. So what we did was, before we gave them any education whatsoever, we provided them with a knowledge test regarding the specific, like a diabetes knowledge test. Let's talk about diabetes, okay? We did a diabetes knowledge test before any education, all right? Then we gave everyone an educational pamphlet, and for the experimental group, we also gave them a video to watch over a 2-week period. At the end of the 2-week period, we did a knowledge test again, all right? We wanted to see if there was any differences between the knowledge between those who just received education through pamphlet and the knowledge of those who received education through pamphlet and video. So in that case, you would do a paired t-test and an independent t-test. You would do a paired t-test because you're looking at the beginning knowledge and post knowledge of both of those groups, right? Understanding how educational pamphlets helps or does not help with knowledge, and how educational pamphlets and videos helps without or does not help with knowledge. But then we would also do an independent t-test, because we want to understand if there's differences between those who only received pamphlets and those who received pamphlets and videos. Does that make sense? So you're doing a both within and a between. So you're doing independent and paired. Now, what if we put that out one more month and we wanted to retest their knowledge and see where they were a month from then? Then we would do an ANOVA. We would do a repeated measures ANOVA or a one-way ANOVA. A repeated measures is within the same group over time, okay? So if you guys pull back up that video from last week and just refresh before next week, you guys will see those. We talked about those in last week's video, okay? And then we have those non-parametric and correlation tests like the chi-square. We have the Pearson R and the Spearman Rho. All right. Qualitative, you could do phenomenology, descriptive, all of that stuff. So I'm only having you choose one potential qualitative method, but choose 3 different potential quantitative methods, because there's more quantitative methods to choose from, okay? So this is what that looks like right here, operationalizing your variables. I'm sharing my screen, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I want you to do is identify what the quant method that you're looking at here. And I put exemplars in here for you to follow. So this way you could see how to fill it out, okay? Provide a description of that quantitative method, how it's going to be implemented, what is the reliability / validity / rigor. So reliability and validity for quant, which you would do the reliability and validity of that psychometric tool of how you're measuring that. And then what method of analysis are you going to use? Let's look at this. So one might be a mixed ANOVA. So a measurement of the same group 3 or more times to identify the effects of an intervention over time, but controls for another variable. In this case, I would control for groups like the experimental versus the control group. So you could do a mixed ANOVA, which would be with those experimental control groups, okay? Methods of implementation. In order to understand what I'm measuring, I am going to measure resilience, and the method that I'm going to measure resilience is by administering the resilience scale to participants in both the experimental group and control group over 3 periods of time. Before the resilience of workshop, resiliency workshop, after a resiliency workshop, and at the end of the first year of college. Okay. Now, when looking up the resilience scale and doing some research on it, I found that the Cronbach's alpha for the scale was between 0.87 and 0.95, showing it had good internal consistency, which means it was a reliable scale. Anything over 0.68 is reliable, okay? It also mentioned that it had construct validity. So you'll see we talked about the types of validity in last week's lecture. Face validity, split half, construct, content validity. Okay. The method of analysis is SPSS. That's how I'm going to measure. And then why do I feel this is important? I feel this would be more appropriate over the repeated measures ANOVA because it accounts for two groups. The repeated measures ANOVA only accounts for the one group. So repeated measures is over time. Okay. Here's another one. So you would just fill this out. So I would maybe use a repeated measures ANOVA, or I would use a correlation. These are just examples. Now for the qualitative, I would say qualitative descriptive. This is a qualitative research or a method of qualitative research that studies particular phenomenon, and it's often value-free in nature. I would use one-to-one structured interviews with randomly selected participants from my study. Or I would do focus groups. And in order to ensure that there was rigor, I would use Sandalowski's criteria for rigor. Okay, and I would put this into Atlas TI. And then I feel that this would be the best way to get qualitative data. Because of the sheer amount of data I would obtain, I would use a qualitative software system to help me organize and do a thematic analysis. I can tell you that likely this right here may be the extent to all your groups are going to utilize for your qualitative piece, just an FYI. Qualitative.
Thomas,
Hmm.
just curious, and maybe I missed something. Do we have a tool for the testing for the reliability and rigor, like the Corbang and SunClaus? I don't feel like I've had this.
For rigor?
Yeah.
No. For qualitative research, remember rigor is showed through criteria for rigor. So you have Sandalowski's criteria, you have DeWitt and Plug's criteria, you have Lincoln and Guba. You remember how when I was going through my research, I said that the expressions or criteria for rigor was really DeWitt and Plug. And that in order for me to make sure that I had a rigorous design, I made sure to follow all of their criteria for rigor. So when you talk about criteria for rigor and trustworthiness of a design, you would talk about the criteria for rigor that you utilized in your research. When you talk about the reliability, and that also shows the validity, okay? When you talk about reliability and validity together, you're talking about quantitative research. Remember that qualitative research, you cannot deem it reliable because it needs to have some type of statistical piece to it. Qualitative research does not have statistics, right? So reliability would be found in quantitative research. This is in your syllabus. Like I said, I put examples here for you guys. I put exemplars there. So I want you to go back to that lecture from last week. Based on the intervention that you chose and your literature review and what you found through it, how are you going to measure or evaluate the outcomes of your intervention? That's what you're going to identify here. Now your groups are going to get together and you're going to talk about at least 3 different quantitative methods to utilize, and then 1 qualitative method. I put examples up here under discussion 4 for you, okay? This way you could just easily look at this and look up some quantitative and qualitative methods that you think are going to work well for you. You guys are going to post this in the forum, but we're also going to do a peer review during next week's class.
Isn't next week the week that we have small groups, or did I
No,
miss that?
the following week.
Okay.
So have this prepared for class next week, okay? So we can discuss it in class. The following week is when your next part of your proposal is due, which is going to include your methods. And with that, let me show you.
I'm sorry, can I clarify something?
Mhm.
So next Tuesday, April 20th is not the small group. Because that's what it says on Sakai.
Is it really?
That's why I was confused too.
Okay, hold on. Let me look at the schedule because maybe I goofed it up.
And this discussion forum is due on Thursday or Friday,
This Friday?
Friday the 23rd. So 3 days after our small group.
This discussion's hold on.
The small group sign up section says 4/20/21 for small group under the sign up tab.
What day is it? Today is the 13th. Yeah. I don't know. Okay, let me look at Sakai because I have on here that the 20th, the 27th is when the small groups are. Let me go look into Sakai. So I might have messed that up in Sakai. Let me look real quick. Come on, Sakai, we can do this. All right, so we are on week 10 next week. It says week 11 is small groups. We are right now, this week we're on week 9. We're in Sakai here. Oops. So if we,
the weekly, Dr. Thomas, the weekly content, we have week 11 for the small groups, but in the sign up, it says the 20th.
okay, so the only discrepancy is in the sign up,
Yes.
not on the weekly content.
No.
Okay, I can fix that real quick. So if you look at the weekly content, we're in week 9 right now. Okay, and this is where qualitative, this is where we spoke about qualitative data and all that stuff, right? Your qualitative PowerPoints. Next week is week 10. And then that is when we talk about the quant and qual methods together as far as the mixed methods, okay? And then week 11, which is the following week, is having small group sessions, okay? So the only place that, I don't know, this is this. Signups. Okay. Let's edit. So on your syllabus itself, the syllabus schedule is what we're going by. I just chose I've just put here the 20th instead of the 27th, guys. Okay, on that sign up section. But if you look on the syllabus and the weekly content, it's all on the 27th. Okay. Did you guys see that in the weekly content piece? Okay,
Thank you.
sure. So, yeah, we'll come to class next week. We'll have a Zoom next week. We'll do the peer reviews on that psychometric stuff. We'll just talk about it a little bit more. Then what you could get from the peer review itself, modify that template and modify that form with the quantitative and qualitative analysis based off of the peer review that you get next week in class. And then that's what you're going to post in your discussion board. Okay. Does that make sense? This way, before you post in your discussion board, you have a discussion with others in your group and with your peers to determine whether or not it's an effective or ineffective way to move forward. All right. And then the following week on the 27th is the small group sessions. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm usually on it with my schedules. I don't know how I made that discrepancy in the sign up form.
So for the mixed method, so you want us to prepare, we just prepare for the class, but the course is gonna be due on the Friday once we do the in-class discussion.
Yes, so just prepare that form for class because I want you to prepare it. I want you to go ahead and talk to your peers about what quantitative and qualitative methods you're deciding on as far as what you're going to use to evaluate your outcomes. I want your peers to have a discussion with you, provide you with feedback, and then based on the feedback you receive, I want you to go ahead and I want you to post your revised one into the discussion board after you receive feedback. Make sense?
Yes, it does. Dr. Ness.
Okay. And then the following week will be small group sessions. Any other questions at all? No questions at all? Sure thing, Sylvia. I seriously need to be in a class with you guys. I'm telling you, you couldn't get away without speaking. And I'm usually that one that likes to bring chocolate and candy. So you stay awake.
You just get the disadvantage of us coming after all these other classes and other abuse. You're great. We love you.
Oh, well, that's awesome.
It's not you, it's us.
It's not, I feel like it's a bad breakup. It's not you, it's me.
I
All
think
right.
after each class, I feel less terrified about our project. So I'm thankful for that as well.
Good. It's where we really want you to be. We want you to be prepared for this. As I said, you could absolutely go to school for your master's degree and get a post-master's certificate to become a nurse practitioner. But you guys chose this prestigious path of getting your doctoral degrees, which is amazing because you guys are really setting the pace for practice in your field. So we want to be sure that you're armed with the information that you need in order to do all of this. Hold on, let me see what Monica's saying. look back at, Monica, look back at this form right here. I'll share it with you. This should help to guide you too. And then I record. Well, I don't remember to record. Dominic always reminds me to record, but I record. So if you have any questions, Monica, just go back to the recording, to the place where you started discussing the paper, so that this way it could remind you. So for your next paper, it's the evaluation plan. So identify the purpose, the overall plan, or what overall questions do you plan to answer with this project? And then you could also include your PICO here as well at the very first part of the purpose of your evaluation plan. And then the key stakeholders. Who are the key stakeholders? Who are you going to be addressing with this intervention? And who are going to be affected? What are the quantitative methods and what are the qualitative methods? Which that's why we're going to go into depth with it with peer reviews next week. And then what is your dissemination plan? How are you going to disseminate your results and your findings to make it impactful in practice? And you would have to identify 3 ways to do that. And then, of course, your grammar mechanics and APA. Now, what you can expect during our small group sessions is that I'll check in with each of your groups to see how you're doing. I'm also going to put the question out there and be very direct as far as the effort that's going in with each group. Is there equal effort that's happening between your group? And are you guys adding to the discussion and the papers equally? I'm also going to ask you guys how each of you feel about your writing skills, and then your abilities. And then I'm going to provide you with resources if you feel like you need more resources for writing. Because one of the other things as a doctorally prepared individual is that you need to have good scholarly academic writing abilities. Okay? And so that's really important as well. And so want to make sure that you guys are good with that. Because I know you guys are working in groups. So sometimes there's like, you know, there might be somebody that's better in writing while somebody else is better in analysis, while somebody else is maybe better in anything that has to do with qualitative stuff. So I can't really see each of your writing abilities through this project. I can only provide you feedback with whatever you provide me that's written. But I want to understand a little bit more about what your needs are as far as scholarly writing goes, so that this way we can prepare you for what next spring is going to be like. And then we could start giving you the resources that you need. Okay.
Dr. Thomas,
Mhm.
if you feel like while you're revising your paper that you feel there's a missing piece and there's like a lack of research that you want to add, can you, or is it common to go back and go back to that list that you have and pick another article and add it?
Gosh, you don't even know how much that happens. Yes. And here's another thing that you'll find. Because when you initially do your literature review, you do it to really define how you're going to move forward with your evaluation or your intervention or your research. But by the time you're done with your research, more research potentially came out within those 9 months or a year, right? And so when you actually go to write your 4 and 5, you actually do an updated literature review where you use the same exact terms and Boolean connectors, but only use the last year's date for the last time that you did a search to the present time to decide to see if any new articles came up. And you would actually add that into your literature review so that you have the most updated literature review that's there. So yes, it's very common. Another thing that you'll find is as you're going through different things, you're going to say, wait, this didn't come up in my literature review, right? And it's an article that you found somewhere, and you decide after critically appraising it that it was a really good article, and darn it, it didn't come up in my literature review. So now what do I do? Yes, you are absolutely able to add it in. all you would do is change the semantics of what you've reported as far as the qualitative and quantitative articles that you found, and then you would ease it in to your article and the findings, or you would ease it into your literature review. All right. Well, I'm going to give you back 30 minutes of time. You know, feel free to connect with each other for that 30 minutes. Do you guys want to go in your groups so you could start talking about quant and qual, or do you need to go ahead and kind of re-review that quantitative piece a little bit more before you go into your groups? Or do you guys want to start discussing? I could put you into your groups to at least just start discussing what you want to do over the next week to be prepared for next week's lecture.
Yeah, can we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll stay in the main room. If you need me, just call for me, okay? All right. So we are gonna put, oh. All right, so Anna, do you just want to connect? Oh, wait, hold on. You, Kristen is here. I lied, it's not you. Sorry. Monica, that's who I'm looking for. Monica, do you just want to go ahead and connect with Kelsey at some point?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and do you, or if you want, I'm here, so if you want to talk to me, I'm more than happy to help you too. I got Annie and Trisana, and then I got Charles, Dominic, and Corey. All right, let me get you guys in your rooms. All right, Monica, I know Kelsey's not here. Is there anything that I can help you with?
Well, I was just looking at like the quantitative being that we're doing the